Alright guys, welcome back to part 2 of restoration of the Hampton FM-800 Tube Tuner. Now, as I said before, getting it working is one thing. Getting it to look like something you might want to have on your shelf is something else. Tube tuners are not the hardest thing in the world to get going, provided the transformers are still good. And that's the thing that converts the AC power to usable power for the unit through a series of primary and secondary windings. We're not going to get into that. And provided the tubes are good, provided all the connections are good in the bottom, it should be good to go. The problem comes when people start fiddling with things and replacing parts and they don't do a good job, or parts like capacitors and resistors go bad. Well, one of the advantages that I have is tremendous test equipment here. Then I can go in and actually probe capacitors and resistors and find out whether they're good or not and replace them. Unfortunately, with this unit, I did not have a schematic or the working architectural electric plan that tells me what the designers intended when they put it together. I had to go through myself and just sort of test components, check things. Obviously, I had a bad rectifier tube, which I said at the beginning. It was smashed in the socket and virtually useless. Luckily, for a few dollars, we only got about $10 into the unit, including the new rectifier tube. So she fired up good. The tuning eye is working beautifully. That's an expensive tube if we have to go get that green eye. But what we want to do now is address some of the problems to make it, to try to mitigate those problems, to make it a much nicer receiver. Base plate, of course, is stamped steel here. And it has a little bit of pitting and stuff, but I've cleaned that up pretty good. It's a fairly handsome, the gold is a fairly handsome plate. I'll give that one more polish. I'm lucky it doesn't have any big dings or dents in it. And it's going to look quite cool if you look at it down here with tuning, with the tuner eye tube coming through the front. The big problem is we want to sand down this cabinet and see if we can get some Danish tongue oil here and really give a nice finish. We don't want a high shine. Really nice audio gear doesn't have a big shine to it. It has a sheen, a low luster sheen, and that's exactly what we want to try to put on that. One of the other problems is this side here, and I'll take this off the stand so you can see it. This side here has a shroud on the bottom which directs the light towards the center. This one is missing the shroud on the side. We have some sheet steel that I picked up here. We want to try to fashion one that'll clip up on there and help direct the light toward the middle. I've cleaned the chassis up pretty good inside, gotten rid of a lot of dust. I've cleaned up the tuning indicator. There's no big scratches on that. But one of the problems, guys, as you see here, when you stick that on here, you can see that it's a little hard to see. Let me get the glare out of the way. It's a little hard to see the red tuning dial against like a copper background. So I'm thinking about cutting a white piece of paper and sort of gluing it on there so that the needle there, let me remove this so you can see it. So the tuning indicating needle, and I've already freed it from the binding. It was binding terribly and wouldn't even go all the way to the upper end, the 108 megacycle and megahertz end. But I'd like to see if I could put a piece of white paper behind there, fasten that down, and that'll give a much better reflective surface. So I think I'll try to do that first. I just took a piece of regular 8.5 by 11 copy paper and cut it to the approximate size. Of course, the doesn't go all the way to each end, but that's fine. But you'll get an idea what I'm talking about now, because if I lay this on here, you can see how much better the dial indicator looks as it moves up and down, and the light will be much more reflective too. So I think that'll be a real gain. So I'm going to go ahead and secure that down with some tape, and we should be good to go for that part of it, and should have a much more attractive looking dial. Okay, with that mounted in place, you can see I have a much more attractive dial indicator, chew as opposed to having the copper behind it. It's much easier to see the tuning needle go up and down. So the next thing I want to do is try to cut the well, actually before I do that, I want to go ahead and get the sander out and try to sand down this case and see if we can oil it up some and make that more attractive. Guys, I think that looks pretty darn good there as it is, so we'll go ahead and we'll get some tongue oil, and I like to use a medium walnut on it because walnut was always associated with fine furniture and fine stereo equipment. So I'll go ahead, just have a rag to apply this with, if I can get the top off, which is always questionable. So I have a couple applicating rags, disposable. I'll start on the side here and put that in, and you can see how really handsome that's going to look. And this is a finish and coloring all in one, and isn't that pretty? Go ahead and do the top now. So here. Wiping quick, you don't want it to all accumulate in one area. And isn't that beautiful? That beautiful rich color. That's exactly what you'd see on a really fine. You don't want to have dark wood with this light gold front face, and that's soaking in really well. That's beautiful. Go ahead and put it in the back too. It's going to take a couple coats to soak in there real good, and a couple coats to finish, but I think that you will agree that is a very, compared to what it looked like 10 minutes ago, it's a very, very handsome color. Okay, we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes or so. Alright, the next thing I'd like to do is try to fashion a light shroud like you see here, and put one on this side over here. And to do that, as I mentioned earlier, I have the sheet steel. It's pretty thick gauge here. So I'm going to cut a thin strip of that and then try bending it in a circular shape. It should have some spring to it and help it hold on there. Okay, I cut out that piece of steel, as you can see, and I'm just using the pen here. It's kind of like a mandrel to form it in a more circular shape before I go cut that and then open that up a little bit. So I'm going to open that up a little bit now, and that should be pretty good there. We want to have a nice tight fit. Now I'm going to cut it down the side there a little, so I leave a little bit of an opening, and we'll see how it goes. All right, there is our basic shroud, so we can just work it around. You can see it's going to have a bigger opening on that side, so we can work it around the pen a little more, knock off these rough edges, and that should really help direct that light into there. So we'll go ahead and see if we have to make it a little bigger or a little smaller. It might have to be a little bigger. I might have to make another one, but I'll give it a shot. It's not perfect by any means, but it'll certainly help redirect the light. So we'll go ahead and install it over here. We'll shoot her into place. Get it right down here. I think we'll put the pop the bulb in first. I've already dry fitted that, so I need to grab the bulb, see where I put that. And of course I can't immediately lay my hands on that, so give me a second. Oh, there it is. Okay, and I want to wipe all the grease and oil off. You don't want to have any. That'll shorten the life of the bulb dramatically. So I want to go ahead and install that back in, that light. Get that up in there. And now she's in place there. Now I'll go ahead and I'll stick the shroud up in there. And I'm going to sort of squeeze that a little more to get a little more tightness in there. There we go. Put that up and around that. And yeah, I think I'll probably put the other end up in there. Yeah, that's a much better fit. And you can see that's pretty good, pretty tight. That's not going to go anywhere. So we'll now go ahead and pop the power on here slowly, and we'll see how that light redirector works there. And now we don't have any kind of light coming out of the side there, so that's a good thing. All the light should be directed down so that the doll lights up. Okay, pretty good, eh? We're getting there. Good morning, guys. Welcome to continuing part 2 of the Hampton FM-800 restoration. Concluded about 5 o'clock yesterday, so we're picking up again today on the restoration project. And we're addressing the case of the terminal uglies that it had here. And one of the things that I wanted to do, I put the Danish oil finish on the cabinet here, and it looked real good. And I gave it an initial coat of varnish, not varnish, but polyurethane. And I want to come back and second coat that now. And work that in a nice light coat on top, and that's going to give a lot of extra protection, so when the next person goes to sit their beer on top of it, which they probably did 100 times in the life of this cabinet, the finish will be protected here. So I'm working that on good. I'll take some of the excess off, let it roll on. I want to also get the front and sides, and we're going to have a very handsome cabinet here. I don't want any drips, so I'm working it down the vent holes. And those vent holes are important. When you're running tubes in that transformer, you better believe that gets warm inside of that set. So I'm going to finish catching this side here. Across the grain in final strokes with the grain. And I think that she's really gonna be much more, or I should say he's gonna be much more handsome as a result of doing a little bit of cabinet refinishing work here. Yeah, that looks awesome. That looks good to go. I just want to get down the sides here. Make sure I don't have any, as Johnny Bench used to say, no runs, no drips, no errors. I'm not using Krylon, but there we go. I think I got all of that, so we wouldn't have any drips. Man, she's looking good. So we're going to let that dry real good, and then we're going to start the assembly of the unit. We also have to clean up the knobs, the volume knob, and the tuning dial knob. So, okay, we'll see you when she's dry. Okay, guys, before we put it back in the case, we're going to do a little bit of video sound. But you can see here on the side, there's still we still got to fix this antenna thing. Is bulging out a little bit on the back, so we got to tighten down the screws on that and make sure everything else is good to go on the unit. So it looks good. It's been running for hours this morning, no problems at all. So we'll get ready to do a little bit of more video and then close her up. Alright, guys, well, there she is, all assembled, and I think you'll agree the wooden case looks so much better than when I first got the unit. She's mounted in there real good, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way things turned out, all things considered. So much of what a stereo tuner is all about is the what they can package for visual appeal and the way stuff looked. And of course, the tuning eye was required in the late 50s through the early 60s because that's the way you could tune in a station and get it in as precise as possible. So I think that's as good as that tuner has probably been since the day it left the factory. I was sorely tempted to change the color of these knobs to black, but you see they have a little indicator on them, a little arrow on each of them. So I just decided at the end of the day just to keep everything as authentically original as possible. It's not my place, guys, to sort of override what the designers and builders had, and the person that designed the case and things. That was not my place to change things. I wanted to have things as original as possible, and I think you can see it really paid off. Well, you know what, guys? It's time to get to listening, so I'm going to start playing. You'll have to watch part 3 of the video series now when we go through and run some listening. At first I'll have it with the case on, and then the case off. We'll have the lights down, and you can get the full experience of having the glow of the tubes and all that. So okay, so stay tuned. Make sure you catch part 3. All right.